Chapter 21. Crossing the Bridge. 12:15 p.m. "Alex, where are we going?" Alex wasn't sure. His feet seemed to have mind of their own. Nunu held Alex tightly by the hand as he marched on, jaw clenched. He was carrying his backpack now, wearing it across his chest and his own on his back, but she still had to walk fast to keep up. Radar trotted along the other side, bandaged but none the worse for wear. "Alex?" Nunu tugged at his hand. Alex stopped walking and staring in surprise as he saw where his feet had brought him. They were coming up to the bridge. The tall one now crossed over the bus ride to the school every morning. The one that had let him see all the way to Manhattan. Up ahead, policemen on horses clip-clopped across the bridge, eyeing every car that passed, checking the terrain below. 2 more police cars drove slowly by. They paused briefly for officers to exchange a few words with men on the back and then moved on. Before he got to the vet's office, Alex hadn't noticed the heavy police presence on the streets. Now he saw them all over town, like they were on high alert or something. "Alex?" Nunu sounded impatient. "You said we'd go home after." Alex waited for the police to move on. He was afraid they might not let kids on the bridge. He realized why he was here. He had to see it for himself. When the police were out of sight, he set the backpacks down beside Nunu. "Wait here. Don't move. You two, Radar, stay." Radar sat obediently. Nunu looked frustrated, but leaned on the guardrail next to Radar. Alex kept his eyes down as he made his way to the center of the bridge, the highest spot. Then he slowly lifted his head to face Manhattan. The Twin Towers were gone. Where they once stood, a huge cloud of smoke and dust billowed up from the ground and trailed off to the east. Alex stared. It didn't seem possible. He held his own 2 fingers where the tower should be, trying to fix the view, trying to make it right. He felt dizzy and gripped the railing tightly. Somewhere under the smoke was his dad. He remembered the last time he'd seen his father, last night in the dark in the bedroom door. "I hate you," Alex had said. Alex heard the words in his head and shivered. His father was in trouble. Alex knew why. He said the ugliest thing possible to his dad, and now he was paying the price. The universe was evening the score. "This is my fault," he whispered. Alex continued to stare on the broken skyline. His mind raced as he struggled to think of the way out of this. He had to undo the damage and bring his father home. What do I do? Radar whimpered and licked his hand. The dog had come to his side, the answer to a question. Alex stared down at his new best friend. And then the deal began to take shape in his head. He ran forwards and backwards. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. He was going to have to give up something big, big enough to make up for what he had done, big enough to bring his father home. He was going to have to make a tremendous sacrifice. He was going to have to give up Radar. Chapter 22. The New Deal. 12:15 p.m. Mac closed his eyes and made another deal. If he stopped watching the news, the phone would ring. He'd be sitting there all morning, glued to the TV. Now he turned away from the disturbing news reports and forced himself to stare at the phone, trying to make it ring. The phone didn't ring. He was on the sofa in the den, in his usual spot on the right-hand end. Bobby had always sat on the left. Most nights, Dottie was in bed. Bobby would join Mac there on the sofa and watch the nightly news. It felt wrong to Mac to be sitting here without Bobby by his side. He continued to stare at his phone. The phone didn't ring. Maybe I need to shake things up, he thought. He got up and walked around the house, turned off the coffee pot. He looked down at Dottie. He walked out to the porch, glanced up and down the empty street, came inside, wound right back where he started, on the couch. As he settled into his usual spot, he glanced over at Bobby's side. Bobby sighed at the sofa. They'd sat there so many times that the empty sofa cushions still held the shape of their bodies like a memory. Max slid over into Bobby's spot. He enjoyed the strangeness of sitting in the wrong seat, and then feeling his son's presence in the cushions molded around him and held him close. He could see the phone out of the corner of his eye, but forced himself not to look. This was the new deal. If he didn't look, the phone would ring. He imagined the call he felt sure would come soon. The phone would ring and he'd answer, and he'd only hear 2 words. "Hi, Pop." And then the thought made him smile. It wouldn't be long now. Chapter 23. Whirlwind. 12:23 p.m. "Where are we going?" Nunu struggled to keep up as Alex led them through the town. "We're going to take Radar home." "Our home?" "Hin's home," Alex replied through clenched teeth. "Why?" Alex groaned inside. The why game again. "Because I have to." "But you just got him." "I know. Don't you want to keep him?" "Duh." "Then why?" He knew that if he tried to say it out loud, it wouldn't make any sense. Besides, how could he tell anyone the truth? That was all his fault. "I have to." "But why?" "I just have to, okay?" Nunu frowned. Her brother wasn't making any sense. Alex glared at her, wishing that she'd just be quiet and leave him alone. The more questions she asked, the worse he felt, and if she asked one more question, he might tell her everything. A blizzard of papers whirled around Alex and Nunu. Radar was furiously swinging Alex's backpack in his mouth, shaking it like a rag doll, spilling notebook paper and sheets of homework everywhere. Alex made no move to stop him, not when they had so little time left together. He just watched as the whirlwind of papers swirled around their heads. Chapter 24. The Man in the White Shirt. 12:23 p.m. The man in the white shirt found himself in a blizzard of memos and printouts, business cards and stationery, paper towels and copy paper swirling through the air. Blowing up the street from the south, from where the tower stood. Strangely, it reminded him of a ticker tape parade he had gone to a few years ago, when the Yankees had won the World Series. He had taken off work to make a father-son outing. He smiled at the memory. It was one of his best days together. The sound of breaking glass cut into his thoughts. He stepped on the picture frame, someone's family photo, father and son, how it had laid there, so many blocks away. Did someone drop it here while running? Or had they been hurled all from this distance? He lifted the photo and leaned against the building, where someone could find it if they came looking. He knew it was pointless, but he couldn't just leave the family behind on the pavement. As he straightened up, he caught a glimpse of himself in the store window. A gray ghost stared at him back. When he left home this morning, he was wearing a white shirt, dark pants, shoes. Now he was coated top to bottom with ash and soot. His hair, his face, even his eyelashes were coated with fine gray powder. He slapped at his pants, trying to knock out the dust. He noticed that even though the pants were now a color of old snow, somehow the crease had held his line, and where the fabric was creased, no dust clung to it. He couldn't stop staring at that razor-sharp line. It seemed so out of place. A reminder how normal and ordinary his life had been when he left home this morning. Chapter 25. Ghosts. 12:40 p.m. "Who are you calling?" "Mom." Alex whipped his phone shut and opened it and tried again, willing to call to go through. His eyes landed on a billboard atop an apartment building. It showed an airplane flying over the rooftops in a cheap fare to Boston under the slogan, "We bring the world to you." He'd probably seen it 1,000 times before. Today it made him shudder. He put a finger to his ear, listening hard, but once again the phone beeped twice and then went dead. He checked the screen, though he had already knew the message would see. Call failed. Nuno tugged at his shirt. Alex? What? She pointed down the street. Alex thought he was seeing a ghost. And then another, and another. They were walking uphill from the dock, some moving slowly and painfully, all of them pale and gray. Who are they? Nuno asked, shaky whisper. Alex shook his head and drew back, sheltering Nuno behind his leg, trying not to let her see him was scared. Only when the ghost figures got closer did Alex realize that they were just a pair of regular people, their clothes and their hairs coated in gray, dust and ash. Why? Why were they so dirty? He wondered. Behind them came dozens more, tripping off the docks, off the ferry boat from Manhattan. Finally it hit him. He waited until one of them had passed close by, a man with only one shoe, walking gingerly on the ball of his foot. Were you at the World Trade Center? Alex asked. The man nodded. We were lucky, he said, hoarsely, and then continued on. These were the survivors. Alex realized making their way home. Until that moment, horrible as the disaster had sounded to Alex, it still had felt far away and distant across the river. Even when he had seen the smoke from the fallen towers, it hadn't quite seemed possible. A part of him just couldn't believe it was real. Now it was right in front of him, close enough to touch. A real live person had been there in the middle of that disaster. A real person, just like his father. Who was that? Asked Nuno. Alex glanced down at his sister. Her constant barrage of questions usually annoyed him. She could be such a pest. Now she just looked small and afraid. They look like ghosts, she whispered. What should he tell her? He looked at the refugees and then back to Nuno. No. She was watching him intently, hanging on his words. No, they aren't ghosts. He fumbled around more, but came up blank. Then he spotted a Dunkin' Donuts on the bench bus. An ad pictured a cup of orange juice and a piping hot blueberry muffin. Those are the muffin people. Nuno's eyes got a little bigger. The what? You don't know about the muffin people? He was totally winging it here. Nuno shook her head. They were trying to make the biggest blueberry muffin in the world, so they could get in the Guinness Book of World Records and be all rich and famous and stuff. How big? Big? I think they used like 4 million tons of flour and like 30 million blueberries. It was going to be huge. He nodded, finding his rhythm. But when they went to bake it, they completely forgot they were indoors. The muffin just kept on rising and rising, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. It smashed out the windows and pressed up against the roof, and they had to run for their lives. And then, boom! The muffin blew up, and the flour went everywhere, and it was a huge mess. They didn't even get into the Guinness Book of World Records. But they all got the day off and went home covered in flour. Alex looked down at Nuno. And that's why they look like that. The end. Nuno just stared at him. For a second, he thought he'd lost her. Then she laughed. Boom! Nice save, Alex thought to himself, and they continued on their way.